My name is Helen Cartwright. 2 days under my son's roof was all it took for my daughter-in-law to look me in the eye and wonder if I'd stolen from her. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. I arrived on a Friday afternoon with a pie on my lap and a careful smile pressed to my face. The driveway of Mark and Lisa's townhouse glinted after a morning rain, a thin film of water collecting in the shallow places that builders never bother to fix. The grass was too even, the bushes too spherical, the kind of place where everything looks perfect if you don't live inside it. Mark opened the door before I had the chance to knock twice. His hug was warm but brief, like a bus pulling in and not quite coming to a stop. "Mom, you made it. Here, let me take that." He lifted the pie with a familiar grin. He has his father's broad hands, though he uses them more gently. Lisa appeared behind him, slim in a pale sweater that probably had a name rather than a color. "Helen," she said, and her lips shaped something that was almost a smile. "I've learned to read the almosts in people. The almost smile, the almost welcome, the almost we're glad you're here." She kissed the air near my cheek and stepped aside, letting me bring in my overnight bag. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and some expensive candle with a name like White Orchard. It was spotless. I could see my reflection in their black marble countertops, a ghost moving through someone else's idea of a home. There were picture frames along the hallway console their wedding, a beach trip with friends, a staged Christmas photo where I sat at the end of the sofa, hands folded as though I'd wandered into it by accident. "We put fresh sheets in the guest room," Lisa said, already moving toward the kitchen. "And we finally got around to organizing the drawers in there." The statement floated by like a leaf in a stream, harmless unless you watched where it was heading. I nodded anyway. "That's lovely, dear." Mark carried my bag upstairs while Lisa and I engaged in that polite choreography women do when we're trying not to step on each other's nerves. I reached for the kettle. She got there first. "Oh, let me. I know where everything is." "Of course you do," I thought. "It's your house." I settled for opening a cabinet for cups. "Top shelf," she said without looking. It isn't easy to be a mother to a married son. You become a guest in a place where you taught the host to stand. I remind myself of that every time I visit, and most days it keeps my pride from knocking against my ribs. The evening passed on small talk legs. Mark asked about my garden. I asked about his project deadlines, and Lisa asked me what retirement felt like, with the tone of someone reviewing a product they're sure they won't buy. We ate the pie on delicate plates that had their own placemats. Lisa laughed once, a light teaspoon of sound that dissolved before it touched anything. Upstairs, the guest room waited like a hotel lobby, neutral, unslept in. A new jewelry box sat on the dresser, lacquered white, a small key tied with a ribbon dangling from it. A curious thing to leave in a guest room, I thought. I set my bag on the chair, smoothed the bedspread with the flat of my hand, and told myself not to look too closely at the details that made me feel like I was trespassing. In the night, I woke to use the bathroom and noticed a shadow in the hallway. Lisa moving quietly, barefoot, opening the laundry room, then the guest room door, mine just a crack, as if to check that I hadn't drowned in her fresh sheets. I said nothing. Some things speak loudest when you leave them unacknowledged. Saturday was spotless, too. We went to the farmer's market where the apples shine as if trying to get into college. Lisa paid with a thin black card that caught the light like a blade. "We should get you those pears," she told me, as though fruit might be an apology for the way she watched me in each stall mirror. On the drive home, she asked sweetly whether I had everything I needed in the guest room. I said yes. Need, I've learned, is a poor word for dignity. By afternoon, the house settled into weekend quiet. Mark tinkered with a bike in the garage. Lisa organized drawers in the living room with the determined energy of someone wrangling more than clutter. I read one of their coffee table books with glossy pages that squeaked when I turned them. When Mark suggested we order Thai, Lisa hesitated a fraction too long and then said, "Sure, pad Thai, no peanuts." She looked at me. "You don't have any sensitivities?" "Only to rudeness," I almost said. "No," I said instead. That night I slept badly anyway. I dreamed of keys, small silver keys I could never quite hold slithering out of my palm like minnows. When I woke, my hand was clenched so tight my nails left crescent moons in my palm. Sunday morning came with the clear light that makes everything look honest. I folded my pajamas, zipped my bag, and made the bed with hospital corners, because some habits carry you when people won't. When I came down to the kitchen, the air was already brittle. Lisa stood at the island, the white jewelry box from the guest room open like a mouth. The ribbon lay to one side, the small key in her fingers. Mark leaned against the counter, arms crossed, jaw working a little. He looked like a good man in a bad moment. "Morning," I said. The kettle began its soft complaint on the stove. Lisa didn't answer at first. She touched the empty velvet slot with her forefinger as if a thing could be summoned by pressure. Then she lifted her eyes to me. "Have you seen my gold bracelet?" I looked at the box, then at her. The question was not a question. It was a thin coat of sugar on a bitter pill. "No," I said. "Should I have?" "It's always here," she said. "I wore it Friday night. I put it back. Yesterday morning, it was still there when I checked." She glanced toward Mark, then back to me. "And now it's gone." Mark cleared his throat. "Lisa, maybe it's in the bathroom? On the nightstand? Did you move things when you were organizing?" Her mouth quivered into a smile that wasn't a smile. "I don't misplace jewelry, Mark." She returned her gaze to me with a softness so careful it cut. "It's very special. Family piece." "I'm sorry it's missing," I said, keeping my voice even. "Tell me what you need me to do." There are moments when a person chooses the shape of the rest of the conversation. Lisa chose hers. "It would help if everyone just looked through their things," she said lightly, the way one asks a child to check their pockets before taking a cookie. "Just to rule things out." "Everyone?" I asked. "There are only 3 of us." "Yes," she said, and the kettle began to whistle like something afraid. It would make me feel better. Mark straightened. "Mom doesn't need to." "It's fine," I said, not taking my eyes off Lisa. "I'll open my bag." I carried it to the island, unzipped it, and began laying my life out in small folded rectangles. 2 blouses, socks rolled into little clouds, a paperback with a cracked spine, my toiletry bag, which I unzipped and turned out comb, toothbrush, sample hand cream, a small vial of lavender oil I use when the house won't let me sleep. I opened my wallet. Coins clinked on their marble. Old photo of Mark at 10, missing front tooth, one arm flung around a dog we fed turkey after Thanksgiving because he looked starved for love. No bracelet. Of course, no bracelet. Lisa watched with the concentration of someone counting tips. Mark watched me, and I kept my face as orderly as my belongings. When the last pocket was open and the last pouch turned out, I stepped back. "Satisfied?" I asked. Her eyes flicked over the spread, then to the floor, the place people look when they're deciding whether to be ashamed. She offered that teaspoon laugh again, thin and vanishing. "It was worth a try," she said. "Things turn up." "Sometimes," I said. Mark exhaled like a held-back tide. "We'll keep looking. It's gotta be here." I put my life back into my bag, one breath at a time, and zipped it. "I'll head out after breakfast," I said. "Church starts at 10. "Of course," Lisa murmured. "Let me know if you notice anything unusual." The words were satin on the outside, sandpaper underneath. We ate eggs with the gentleness of people sipping hot tea. Conversation was a brittle bridge no one trusted. After Mark carried my bag to the car, on the driveway he hugged me longer than Friday. "Mom, I'm sorry. This is..." She's stressed. Work money. The kitchen remodel. He trailed off, and the word money hung between us like a wire. I know, I said. But stress doesn't turn good people into bad ones. It just reveals what's under the paint. He flinched. I'll find the bracelet. I hope you find the truth, I said. It's better company. I touched his cheek like I used to when fevers broke. Call me. Back in my own small kitchen, the afternoon light slanted across the table dust motes like slow snow. I set my bag down and leaned on the counter, letting the quiet settle inside my bones. The phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor who'd seen me walking in. Back already. How was the visit? I typed short and deleted it. I typed fine and deleted that too. In the hallway mirror, my face looked the same. It had looked on Friday. And yet different, the way a room changes when someone moves the smallest thing. I boiled water for tea, poured it over a bag with the same tired patience I give to people. The steam rose and fogged my glasses. That should have been the end of it, an ugly hint, an unkind morning buried beneath chores and an early night. But rumors walk faster than apologies. By evening, the first of them had already put on shoes. The next morning, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in years. Two women talking in the grocery store aisle behind me, their voices low but sharpened to pierce through the thin air. You know she was staying with them that weekend, right? One said, her words sticky with gossip. The other replied. And now Lisa's bracelet's gone. What are the chances? I froze halfway to the shelf of tea biscuits, my hand hovering over the box. My name wasn't spoken, but it didn't have to be. The shape of the conversation was unmistakable, and my face fit it too well. I turned slightly, pretending to look for something else, and saw them, neighbors from 3 streets over, women I'd spoken to politely at community events, women who now turned their heads and found the floor very interesting when my eyes met theirs. I finished my shopping without tasting a single thought, only the dry ache of being seen as something I wasn't. At the checkout, the cashier smiled at me the same as always, but I wondered if she'd heard too. That's the thing about suspicion, it moves faster than truth, and it never asks for proof before taking root. By the time I reached home, I'd already decided I wasn't going to run to Mark crying about what people were saying. He was in a marriage now, and I had no desire to become another problem to solve between mortgage payments and dinner plans. But doing nothing, that wasn't an option either. I started small, just listening. Over the next few days, I lingered a little longer at the post office, chatted more than usual at the bakery. People can't resist circling back to fresh gossip if they think you're harmless enough not to notice. And what I noticed was this. Lisa wasn't just letting people assume I'd stolen her bracelet. She was shaping the story herself. She was always poking around, someone told another at the cafe. Lisa says she went upstairs without asking. Twice. Maybe she didn't mean to take it, another voice offered. But still, you'd think she'd feel bad enough to return it quietly. Each retelling shaved away my innocence like a piece of soap wearing down in the dish. One evening, I called my old friend Margaret. She and Lisa had crossed paths years before when Margaret's daughter and Lisa had been in the same Pilates class. Lisa Margaret said, her tone dropping into that careful register reserved for unpleasant truths. Oh, she's been through this before. The words made me sit straighter. Before Margaret hesitated. Let's just say, a neighbor of hers once had a similar problem. Jewelry went missing. Lisa was there, and it turned into a quiet mess. But that neighbor moved away, and nothing was ever proven. I pressed for details, but Margaret wouldn't say more. She'd given me enough to chew on, though. A pattern. And if there was a pattern, there might be a paper trail. That weekend, I drove to Lisa's old neighborhood. It was only 30 minutes away, but the air felt different there. Older houses, bigger yards, fewer perfect hedges. I found the address Margaret had mentioned and sat in my car for a long moment, wondering if I was being foolish. Then I saw her, an older woman, watering hydrangeas in the front yard of the house next door. When I introduced myself and mentioned knowing Lisa, the woman's smile thinned. Haven't seen her in years, she said. I kept my tone light. I heard she used to live around here. You must have known her well. Well enough, she replied, setting down the hose. She was nice enough at first. But I'll tell you something, she had a way of making trouble without getting her hands dirty. I let the pause breathe, then asked, did anything ever go missing when she was around? The woman's eyes narrowed just slightly. Why I gave her the barest outline Lisa's bracelet gone me under suspicion. Something in her expression softened. You're not the first, she said quietly. A few years back, my sister's ring disappeared after a party at Lisa's place. She swore she'd never seen it. 2 months later, I saw that same ring in the window of a pawn shop downtown. Couldn't prove it, of course, but I know what I saw. My chest tightened, not with shock, but with the confirmation that I hadn't been imagining Lisa's capacity for this kind of thing. I thanked her, scribbled the pawn shop's address in my notebook, and drove away with the first glimmer of a plan. That night, I spread my notes across the kitchen table. The names of people who'd repeated the rumor. The details from Margaret. The address of the pawn shop. It wasn't much yet, but it was a map of sorts. A way forward. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat back, and thought about Lisa's face the morning she'd suggested I look through my things. How careful she'd been to smile just enough to tilt her head in that mock concern that made refusal seem guilty. If she thought she could paint me as a thief and walk away untouched, she was about to find out just how long I could stand still while the truth took shape around me. The next step would take more than listening. It would take watching her quietly, closely, and finding the crack in her perfect marble surface. Because everyone has one. And when you find it, even the smallest tap can break the whole thing apart. The following week, I became a shadow. Not the kind that lurks in corners, but the kind that blends into the scenery so well you forget it's there until it's too late. I didn't rush. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that truth isn't a sprinter, it's a marathon runner pacing itself until the finish line is in sight. I started with the simplest thing. I paid attention to Lisa's patterns. She posted more of her life online than she realized, especially in those casual Instagram stories where people think no one's really watching. Morning coffee at the boutique cafe downtown, midweek hair appointments, Thursday evenings at her book club that never seemed to mention books. I kept a small notebook in my purse, jotting down dates, times, and locations. At first, it felt absurd. What kind of mother-in-law takes notes on her son's wife like some private detective in a cheap novel? But then I'd remember the look in her eyes when she accused me without using the word steal, and the absurdity melted into purpose. On the second Thursday, I followed her. Not closely, just enough to keep her in sight as she left her street and drove into town. Sure enough, she parked outside a wine bar. Through the large front windows, I could see her meeting with two women I didn't recognize. The laughter was bright, the kind that says, "We're among our own," not the polite tinkle she used at home. I didn't care about her friends. What mattered was what she did afterward. And that night afterward meant a slow walk 3 blocks to a small pawn shop, one I recognized from my conversation with Lisa's former neighbor. My heart thudded in my chest as I parked a street away. I watched her step inside, greeted by the kind of clerk who knows your name. She stayed for only a few minutes, then left without any visible package or bag. I made a note of the time. The next morning, I went back. The shop was dim, the air faintly metallic. Behind the counter, glass cases gleamed with rings, bracelets, and watches, some flashy, some modest. "Can I help you?" the clerk asked, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a habit of drumming his fingers on the counter. "I'm looking for something for my daughter," I said, pretending to scan the displays. My eyes moved over each tray until they landed on it, a gold bracelet, delicate but with a distinctive clasp. I'd seen it enough times on Lisa's wrist to know it wasn't just a similar piece. It was hers. I felt a flicker of cold satisfaction. "That one," I said, pointing casually. "Pretty. How long have you had it?" He glanced at a small tag beneath it. "Brought in last week." We hold them for a month before putting them on display. You know, waiting period in case it's stolen. I forced a small laugh. Makes sense. Want to see it? I nodded and he unlocked the case, laying the bracelet on a small black cloth. The weight of it in my palm was undeniable. I ran my thumb over the clasp, memorizing every detail. "What's the price?" I asked. He told me, and I made a show of hesitating. "Let me think about it. If I want it, can I put it on hold 24 hours max?" he said. I left without buying it. I didn't need to own it. I needed to prove where it had been. And for that, I'd need something more official than my word against hers. That afternoon, I paid a visit to Officer Daniels, a man I'd known since he was a boy in my Sunday school class. His mother still brought me jam every Christmas. He listened without interrupting as I explained the situation, showing him my notes, the pawn shop address, and the date I'd seen Lisa go in. "Helen, if this is true," he said slowly, "it's not just about the bracelet. It's about false accusation, too." "I don't want to press charges," I said. "Not yet. I just want the truth in my pocket before I decide." He agreed to look into the shop's records. Pawn shops are required to log every transaction with ID and signature. If Lisa's name was on that slip, the lie would collapse under its own weight. For the next 3 days, I went about my life as usual, grocery shopping, tending my garden, attending choir practice, outwardly calm, inwardly waiting for the phone to ring. When it did, Daniels didn't waste time. "It's her," he said. "Pawned it under her maiden name. Signed for it herself. We've got the copy on file." I closed my eyes, letting the confirmation settle over me like a heavy coat I'd been carrying without knowing it. "Do you want to confront her?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "But not in private. She built this accusation in public. We'll let the truth breathe in the same air." And with that, the plan began to take shape. It wouldn't be loud or violent, no screaming match on the lawn, no dramatic hair-pulling scene for the neighbors. No, my confrontation would be something Lisa couldn't twist into another story. It would happen on her turf with her audience, and with the one person whose opinion mattered most, my son, standing right there when the truth fell into his hands. Because some things don't need to be shouted to destroy a lie. Sometimes the quiet truth is the sharpest knife of all. I waited for the right opening, not days, but weeks. If Lisa's web of whispers had taught me anything, it was that timing determined whether the truth cut like a scalpel or blunted like a spoon. I wanted the cut clean, undeniable, and in front of the very eyes that had once darted away from mine in the grocery store. The opportunity came wrapped in an invitation I almost threw away: Mark's birthday dinner. Lisa texted me personally, which was unusual. "We're having a small gathering at the house. Just family and close friends. Hope you can make it." I read the message twice, looking for the trap. She hadn't extended an olive branch in months, but maybe she thought enough time had passed, or maybe she was feeling smug enough to believe I'd let the whole thing go. I RSVP'd with a polite, "Of course. Looking forward to it." In the days leading up to the dinner, I prepared my arsenal, not of weapons, but of facts. Officer Daniels had provided me with a photocopy of the pawn ticket, Lisa's maiden name, her signature, the date, and the bracelet's description in black ink. I kept it in a slim envelope, the kind you could slip from your bag with a flick of your wrist. When the evening arrived, I dressed carefully, a deep navy dress, pearl earrings, and my hair pinned neatly. Not overdressed, but impossible to overlook. I wasn't there to blend into the background this time. Mark greeted me warmly at the door, kissing my cheek. Lisa was behind him, her smile stretched too tight. "Helen," she said, "so glad you could make it." I thanked her, then scanned the living room. About a dozen people were there. Mark's colleagues, a couple of Lisa's friends and family members. The same mix of faces that had once heard her quiet poison. Perfect. Dinner was served buffet style. I sat at the table across from Lisa, watching her perform hostess duties with practiced charm. She poured wine, laughed in the right places, leaned in when others spoke. It was a performance I'd seen before, but tonight I knew the ending. After dessert, Mark tapped his glass. Before we wrap up, I just want to say how much I appreciate everyone being here. It was my cue. I waited for the soft ripple of applause to fade, then rose from my seat. Mark, may I say something? The room quieted, eyes turning toward me. I've been wanting to clear up a misunderstanding. I began keeping my voice even. Some months ago, a certain piece of jewelry went missing during my visit here. A gold bracelet. A few people shifted uncomfortably. I saw Lisa's jaw tighten. Now I know there were assumptions made, I continued. And I've lived with the weight of those assumptions every time I've seen certain faces turn away. I reached into my bag, pulling out the envelope. But recently, I came across proof that I'd like to share, proof of where that bracelet went and who took it there. I crossed the room, handing the envelope to Mark. Go ahead. Read it aloud. He glanced at me, puzzled, then opened it. His eyes scanned the pawn ticket, moving back and forth as the lines connected in his mind. When he looked up, the color had drained from his face. This is Lisa's signature, he said slowly. And it's the bracelet. You pawned it. Lisa's hands fluttered toward him, then fell to her sides. Mark, it's not what it looks like. It looks like you accused my mother of stealing something you sold for cash. Mark snapped, his voice low but carrying through the room. Murmurs rose around us, some sharp with disbelief, others with the soft satisfaction of puzzle pieces finally fitting together. Lisa's face hardened. I was under pressure. I didn't know how to tell you. It was a stupid mistake. A stupid mistake, Mark cut in. You humiliated her. You let people think she was a thief. I stood still, my hands clasped in front of me. I hadn't come for shouting or tears, only for this moment when truth sat in the middle of the room like a stone no one could ignore. Lisa tried to regain control, speaking to the room. I owe Helen an apology. Her words landed flat. Apologies mean little when they're dragged into daylight. I smiled faintly. Thank you, Lisa. But an apology won't erase what's been said. I only hope everyone here remembers this as clearly as they remember the first version of the story. The dinner limped on after that conversation, forced and brittle. People avoided meeting Lisa's eyes, but they came to me quietly in twos and threes to say they were sorry that they'd doubted me. When I finally left, Mark walked me to my car. I can't believe He shook his head. Mom, I'm so sorry. I put a hand on his arm. I didn't do this to hurt your marriage, Mark. I did it because my name matters to me. My dignity matters to me. And as I drove away, I felt the strange calm that comes when you've carried a weight so long you almost forget it's there, and then finally, you set it down. The morning after Mark's birthday dinner, my phone started ringing before I'd even poured my first cup of coffee. Some calls were short, almost embarrassed neighbors who had heard the rumors months ago, now scrambling to express relief that I'd been cleared. Others were warmer, the kind you could tell came from people who had believed in me all along but hadn't wanted to get caught in the crossfire. I thanked them all politely, but I didn't dwell on their words. People have short memories for the pain they cause when it's someone else's burden. By mid-morning, I got a text from Lisa. Just one sentence, I hope you're satisfied. I stared at it for a long moment before deleting it without responding. Satisfaction wasn't the right word for what I felt. This wasn't triumph. It was the relief of closing a book I never wanted to read in the first place. But I also knew the battle wasn't entirely over. Small towns have a way of holding on to the shadow of a story even when the truth has been nailed down. A whisper can travel faster than a correction, and even now I could picture the few people who would cling to the original version because it was more entertaining. 2 days later, I ran into Mrs. Harris at the market, an old friend of my late husband's mother. She leaned in close, lowering her voice. Helen, dear, I knew you couldn't have done such a thing. But between us, I think Lisa's been spinning tales for longer than anyone realizes. I gave a faint smile, acknowledging her words without inviting gossip. I'd had enough of that to last me a lifetime. Still, what she said stuck with me. I remembered the old neighbor who'd hinted at Lisa's past lost items. The bracelet might have been the only time she'd accused me, but I doubted it was the only time she'd created a story to hide her own actions. Mark called me later that week. His voice was heavy, tired. "Mom, I don't know what to do. She says she's sorry, but I can't look at her without thinking about what she did to you." "Mark," I said gently, "that's not for me to decide. You're the one who has to live with her, not me. But I will say, this trust is a fragile thing. Once it breaks, it's never quite the same." There was a pause on the line, then he sighed. I just, I feel like I let you down. I didn't defend you when I should have." "You believed your wife?" I replied. "Most men would. That doesn't make you a bad son, but it does mean you've seen what she's capable of. Don't forget that." He promised he wouldn't. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a shift in the community. People who had kept their distance began stopping to chat again. At church, someone slipped a note into my hymn book. "We're glad you didn't let them silence you." It was strange how vindication could feel both sweet and bittersweet. Sweet because my name was clear. Bitter because I knew the stain of that accusation would always linger in some corners. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting in my garden when Mark pulled up unannounced. He didn't come alone. My grandson Ethan hopped out of the car running straight into my arms. "We thought we'd spend the day here," Mark said. He glanced back toward the car where Lisa sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead. "Lisa's here too. She wants to talk." I didn't move. "If she wants to talk, she can come to me." A moment later, Lisa stepped out. Her posture was stiff, her chin slightly raised, but there was no fight in her eyes this time. "Helen," she began, "I know an apology won't fix what I did, but I am sorry. I was under pressure, I made a bad choice, and instead of owning it, I made you my scapegoat." I let the silence stretch not out of cruelty, but because I wanted her to hear her own words in the stillness. Finally, I said, "Lisa, I accept your apology, but trust isn't built in a single conversation. I'll be polite when we see each other, but I won't stay under your roof again." She nodded once. "I understand." Ethan ran up, then tugging at my sleeve, asking if I'd come watch him kick the ball around. I followed him to the lawn, leaving Lisa and Mark standing by the porch. For the rest of the afternoon, I focused on Ethan, his laughter, his boundless energy, the way the sunlight turned his hair to gold. This was the family I cared about preserving. Not the image of perfection Lisa tried to project, but the real connections that would last long after this ugly chapter was over. When they left that evening, Mark hugged me longer than usual. "Thank you for giving her a chance to apologize," he murmured. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew forgiveness and reconciliation were two very different things. She might have my forgiveness, but my trust, that was buried with the first look she gave me when she thought I'd stolen from her. The weeks that followed brought a subtle but steady change. It started with the small gestures, a loaf of homemade bread left on my porch from Mrs. Langley down the street, a wave from Mr. Cooper, who hadn't so much as nodded in my direction since the bracelet incident. At church, the whispers that had once followed me down the aisle had turned into greetings. People lingered after service to speak to me again, asking about my garden, my baking, my grandson. It wasn't that they'd suddenly become better people, it was simply that the truth was now public property, and aligning with me was safe again. But I noticed something else too. Lisa was no longer quite the center of things. She still smiled, still tried to charm, but there was a hesitation in the way people responded to her, now a faint reserve. It was as if the same air she'd once poisoned had drifted back toward her. One Wednesday morning, I went to the town's little cafe for my usual coffee. As I walked in, I saw Lisa sitting at a table with two other women. They glanced at me, then leaned toward each other, murmuring, She looked up just as I passed and gave a tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I ordered my coffee and sat by the window, pulling out my notebook, not to spy this time, but to write down thoughts that had been circling my mind since the whole ordeal began. It struck me how fragile reputations are. Mine had been bruised by a whisper, hers by the truth. The difference was that mine could be repaired with evidence. Hers would remain cracked because the people she'd tried to impress now knew her mask could slip. That afternoon, Officer Daniels stopped by. "Just thought you'd like to know," he said with a grin. "The pawn shop owner's been keeping an eye on things. Apparently, Lisa hasn't been back." "Good," I said simply. "Maybe she's learned." He chuckled. "Or maybe she's just realized the whole town's watching." Later that week, Mark came by alone. He looked worn down, as if the weight of pretending everything was fine at home was finally showing. "Mom," he said, sitting at my kitchen table, "I've been thinking, what she did wasn't just about the bracelet. It was about the way she tried to turn me against you." I stirred my tea. "And what are you going to do with that realization?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know yet. But I'm seeing her differently now. I'm not letting her words be my truth anymore." It was the first time I'd heard him speak about Lisa without trying to defend her. I didn't press him some decisions a man has to arrive at on his own. In the meantime, I began quietly reclaiming the spaces where I'd felt unwelcome before. I joined the library's book club again, even though I'd skipped months of meetings. The first evening back, one of the women pulled me aside. "We missed you, Helen," she said softly. "And for what it's worth, I never believed a word of it." I smiled, not because I believed her, but because it was easier than asking why she'd stayed silent if she hadn't believed. By the start of the next month, my life felt lighter. Not because everyone had suddenly become kind, but because I no longer felt I had to carry their approval like a fragile vase that might slip from my hands. Lisa, on the other hand, seemed to be shrinking. At family gatherings, she avoided lingering near me. When Ethan came to stay for a weekend, she dropped him off quickly, offering only a brief wave from the car window. And yet, despite everything, I kept my distance without outright cutting her off. Some battles are best ended not with a victory parade, but with a quiet retreat that leaves the other person alone with their own reflection. The town had shifted its gaze, and in a place where reputation is currency, Lisa's account had been drained. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening. I had just settled in with a book when my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach tighten. It was Lisa. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. Her voice was strained, almost brittle. "Helen, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Can I come over?" Rain pattered harder against the windows as I hesitated. "Is something wrong?" A pause then. "Yes, please." 20 minutes later, her car pulled into my driveway. She stepped out wearing a beige raincoat, her hair plastered to her cheeks. No umbrella, no makeup, just the raw outline of a woman whose usual armor had been stripped away. I opened the door but didn't invite her in right away. Instead, I stood aside and let her decide whether she wanted to cross the threshold. She did. Inside, she wrapped her arms around herself, dripping on the mat. "I need your help," she said without preamble. I gestured toward the kitchen. "Sit down. Tell me." She perched on the edge of the chair like a student waiting for a scolding. "It's about Ethan," she said finally. "He's been having trouble at school. Some of the kids found out about what happened with the bracelet. They said things to him, called him a liar's son." I felt a pang in my chest. Ethan didn't deserve to be dragged through this, but I kept my expression neutral. "And what do you want me to do?" Her eyes flickered up to mine. I thought, maybe if you spoke to the parents, explained it was all a misunderstanding, they might tell their kids to stop. I almost laughed, though not out of humor. "Lisa, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the truth. You took that bracelet and blamed me for it. Do you want me to lie now to make you more comfortable?" She flushed, looking down at her hands. I just... I don't want him to suffer because of my mistake. I let her sit with that. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the rain against the roof. Finally, I said, if you're asking me to protect Ethan, I will. But if you're asking me to protect your image, that's different. Her shoulders sagged. I'm asking you to protect him. So I did. I went to the school the next day, met with the principal, and explained that whatever the children had heard was adult business that had no place in their classroom. I didn't offer details. I didn't mention Lisa. I only made sure Ethan wouldn't carry the weight of a feud he didn't start. When Lisa heard what I'd done, she called to thank me. You could have told them everything, she said quietly. I could have, I agreed. But I didn't. For him, not for you. There was another long pause, and then she said something I didn't expect. I don't know how to make this right. I almost told her she never could. But instead I said, then start by not making it worse. From that day, her tone toward me changed. She was still careful, still guarded, but the edge of defensiveness had dulled. It wasn't friendship, it was a reluctant respect, born from the knowledge that I had the power to hurt her and chose not to. That power, I realized, was stronger than revenge. It was control over my own story, something she could never again take from me. It was late autumn when the crisis came. Mark called one evening, his voice tight. Mom, Lisa's in the hospital. Nothing life-threatening, but she fainted at work and they want to keep her overnight for observation. Could you stay with Ethan until I get things sorted? Of course, I said without hesitation. Ethan was my priority always. I drove over to their house. Mark met me at the door looking frazzled. Thank you. I need to head back to the hospital. She's scared and I don't want her alone. Ethan barreled into my arms, talking over himself about a school project. I smiled and let Mark go, settling in for the night with my grandson. The house felt different when it was just the two of us, lighter, warmer, as if the tension that usually lingered in the air had been lifted. We made grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, then played board games until bedtime. I thought that would be the end of it, but around 9 p.m., the door opened and Mark walked in with Lisa right behind him. I stood startled. They decided to discharge me early, she explained quickly. They said it was stress, not anything serious. Mark exhaled. I didn't want to leave her there alone if she didn't have to be. Lisa sat down on the couch, still pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ethan, sweetheart, why don't you go brush your teeth? She said softly. When he was gone, the silence stretched. Lisa stared at the carpet, then at me. I think part of why I've been so stressed is because I've never made things right between us. Mark glanced between us, clearly sensing where this was headed. Lisa? No, she said, holding up a hand. I need to say this while I can. She turned to me. I accused you because I was embarrassed. The bracelet wasn't worth much, not in money, but I thought people would think less of me if they knew I'd misplaced it. And then once I'd said it out loud, I didn't know how to take it back without ruining myself. So I let it ruin you instead. Mark's eyes widened. Lisa, I'm not excusing it. She went on, her voice trembling. I thought I was protecting my place in this family. I see now I was tearing it apart. I didn't rush to answer. I wanted my words to land with the weight of the time that had passed. You didn't just tear it apart, I said finally. You put a crack between me and my son. You made me a stranger in his eyes. That takes more than an apology to mend. Lisa nodded, swallowing hard. I know. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. I let her words become my truth. I looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. The important thing is you see it now. The tension eased slightly, but it wasn't some grand reconciliation. Lisa's confession didn't erase the past, it simply put the truth on record in front of the one person who had needed to hear it most. When Ethan came back into the room, the conversation shifted to lighter things. but I noticed the way Mark looked at me differently, as if he was seeing not just his mother but the strength she'd carried through every quiet humiliation. Later, as I drove home, I realized something: I had stopped needing her apology long ago. What I had wanted and finally received was acknowledgement, proof that the truth had been buried, not lost. The invitation came in the mail, printed on cream cardstock with gold lettering: Fall Harvest Gala celebrating community integrity. I almost laughed when I read it. The irony of the word integrity wasn't lost on me. Still, it was a town tradition, and I'd attended nearly every year. The event raised funds for local charities, and the entire community came together under the twinkling lights of the community hall. That Saturday evening, I arrived in a navy dress and my mother's old pearl earrings. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon cider and roasted squash. Laughter bounced off the high wooden beams, and strings of golden fairy lights softened every corner of the room. I hadn't expected to see Mark and Lisa there, but of course they were. Lisa wore a sleek burgundy dress, her hair in loose waves. She caught sight of me and froze for half a heartbeat before smoothing her expression into polite neutrality. We exchanged nods from across the room. Mark, however, walked over almost immediately. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice warm but slightly tentative. The evening moved along with speeches from local leaders, silent auction tables, and clusters of conversation. Then, during the awards segment, the host announced something unexpected. "This year, we'd like to recognize a member of our community who has demonstrated grace under pressure and unwavering truthfulness, even in the face of damaging falsehoods. Please welcome Helen Morris." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. I stood, my heart pounding, and made my way to the stage. The host handed me a small plaque and leaned into the microphone. "Helen's quiet perseverance and integrity are an example to us all. She reminds us that character is proven in moments of adversity." As polite applause filled the hall, I saw Lisa in the crowd. Her cheeks were flushed and she kept her eyes on the floor. Mark, however, was watching me with something like pride. I took the microphone, though I hadn't planned to speak. "Thank you." I began, my voice steady. "Integrity is not something you can buy or borrow. It's the truth you live with when the doors are closed and no one is watching. And it's the thing people remember long after the gossip fades." There was a pause, the kind that feels like the whole room is leaning in. "I'm grateful to those who stood by me when it mattered," I added. "And to those who didn't, I hope you find the courage to do better next time." When I stepped down from the stage, several people stopped me to offer congratulations. But the most unexpected moment came when Lisa approached. Her voice was low, almost swallowed by the noise of the room. "You deserved that," she said. "More than I deserve to stand here." I looked at her for a long second. Then, "Maybe the best thing you can do," I said quietly, "is remember that the next time you feel tempted to protect yourself at someone else's expense." She nodded, her expression unreadable, and drifted back into the crowd. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even full justice. But as I left that night, I realized it was enough, not because the town had finally acknowledged me, but because I no longer needed their acknowledgement to feel whole. It began with a favor so ordinary I didn't think twice. Mark had called that afternoon while on his lunch break. "Mom, Lisa's been clearing out some space in the attic," he said, a little out of breath. "We found a bunch of old family photo albums from when I was a kid. She thought you might want to have them." I smiled at the thought. Of course I'd like them. "When should I come by?" "She's busy with Ethan's school meeting this afternoon. I'll leave the spare key under the mat for you. Just grab the box marked albums. It's right by the attic entrance." That was that. No suspicion, no tension. At least, not until I climbed the narrow attic steps a few hours later. The air was warm and dry, scented faintly of cedar and old cardboard. Shafts of pale light spilled from the single window, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the stillness. The attic was cramped, but orderly holiday decorations stacked neatly storage bins labeled in Lisa's sharp handwriting, and an old rocking chair leaning against the wall like a forgotten relic. Sure enough, the box of albums sat where Mark had said it would be right by the entrance. I crouched, sliding it toward me, and that's when I noticed something else. Half hidden behind a stack of artificial wreaths was a much smaller box. The cardboard was faded, the edges softened as if it had been moved and handled for years. A thin piece of fraying twine held the lid shut. I didn't need to open it. I should have just left it there untouched. But something about it, the way it was tucked away, almost secretive, pulled at me. I set the photo album box aside and pulled the smaller one into the light. The twine came loose easily. Inside, instead of family keepsakes, I found papers, a disorganized jumble of envelopes, folded letters, receipts. One piece of paper caught my eye immediately. It was a pawn shop ticket, the kind printed on cheap yellow carbon paper. The date made my breath catch. It was from 2 days before the missing gold bracelet incident, and the description 14K gold bracelet with small leaf charm. Exactly the one I'd been accused of stealing. I sat back on my heels, the paper trembling slightly between my fingers. I had always known the truth, of course, but here, it was tangible and undeniable. She hadn't just lost it or misplaced it. She had pawned it. And then she'd let the accusation fester, watching me live under that shadow. Beneath the pawn slip was something stranger still, a folded letter in faded ink addressed to Lisa from a woman named Claudia. The handwriting was urgent, almost frantic. "You can't keep doing this. One day, someone will connect the dots and you won't be able to talk your way out of it. I won't be able to protect you anymore." There were no details, no mention of the bracelet, but the meaning was clear enough. This wasn't the first time Lisa had crossed a moral line. My first instinct was a rush of anger so sharp it left me momentarily lightheaded. The attic seemed smaller, the air warmer. I could see her face in my mind, the cold, measured look she'd worn when she'd told Mark about the theft, the way she'd spoken with quiet conviction, planting seeds of doubt in my own son's mind. It would have been so easy to carry this box downstairs, set it in front of Mark, and watch her entire facade crumble in minutes. I could picture the way his expression would shift from confusion to betrayal, the way he'd realize how long she had let this lie stand. And yet, Ethan's face flashed in my mind too. That boy had already been caught in the undertow of adult mistakes once. Did I really want to pull him under again? I retied the twine slowly, my fingers working almost of their own accord. I placed the box back where I'd found it, but not before slipping the pawn slip into my bag. I told myself it was for safekeeping, a kind of insurance should the truth ever need defending again. When Mark got home later that day, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the photo albums in front of me. We chatted briefly, and I said nothing about what I'd found. Some truths I decided required careful timing, and sometimes the right moment never came at all. That night, I sat at my own kitchen table, the pawn slip laid flat before me. I traced the date with my finger as though by touching it I could finally erase the sting of those days when my character had been questioned in my own son's home. The paper felt light, but it carried years of weight. I considered the possibilities. I could confront her directly in private and force her to admit it. I could present it to Mark and end her credibility forever. Or I could keep it quietly as a reminder that I had the power to destroy her image, but chose restraint instead. The decision settled on me like a heavy coat. The next morning, I called Lisa. "I found something in the attic," I said, my voice even. "A box. You might want to come get it before someone else does." Her silence on the other end was telling. "I'll be there in half an hour," she said finally. When she arrived, she didn't even greet me. Her eyes flicked to the small box I'd set on the table. She took it in both hands, her knuckles whitening against the cardboard. "You could ruin me with what's in here," she said after a long pause. "I could," I replied, meeting her gaze. "But I'm not going to. That's not who I am. And I think you know that now." Her jaw tightened, but something shifted in her eyes. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly, but there was no mistaking the awareness that she was standing in front of someone she could no longer dismiss or belittle. "Thank you," she said quietly, almost reluctantly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence between us was weighted not with hostility, but with the understanding that the balance of power had shifted. When she left, I sat for a long time staring at the door. Sometimes I realized the most devastating thing you can do to someone who has wronged you isn't to strike back, it's to let them live, knowing you hold their fate in your hands and you've chosen not to use it. It was a choice she would never forget. And that was its own kind of justice. A week passed after the attic incident, and Lisa's visit lingered in my mind like the scent of rain after a storm, faint, but impossible to ignore. She hadn't called or texted, and I hadn't expected her to. Our interaction that day had been enough to redraw the lines between us. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Lisa standing there, not in her usual perfect hair and tailored outfits, but in jeans and a sweater, her face free of makeup. She held a medium-sized paper bag in both hands. "I baked these," she said, her voice careful. "They're cranberry orange scones. I know you like them." I took the bag more out of reflex than hospitality. The warmth of the baked goods seeped through the paper. "Thank you," I said, though the word felt cautious in my mouth. She hesitated before stepping inside when I moved aside. Her eyes roamed the kitchen as though trying to find the safest place to rest. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, leaning against the counter. "And about what you didn't say." I kept my hands busy setting the scones on a plate. "What do you mean?" "You could have shown Mark what you found," she said plainly. "You could have made sure he never looked at me the same way again." "And you didn't." "That's true," I said, sitting down at the table. "I also didn't forget what happened." She lowered herself into the chair opposite me. "I know you haven't, and I can't undo it. But I'd like to try and, at least, prove I'm not the same person I was then." Her tone was steady, but there was a flicker in her expression, something like unease. I wasn't sure if it was because she truly felt remorse or because she knew I could still ruin her if I chose to. "What do you expect from me, Lisa?" I asked. "Forgiveness, trust." She considered that. "Maybe just a little less of the distance between us. For Mark. For Ethan." It would have been easy to dismiss her, to say no, and walk her to the door. But Ethan's name pulled at me. That boy had been caught between loyalties once already, and I had no wish to see him in that place again. "I can't pretend the past didn't happen," I said finally. "But I can agree to be civil. For the sake of the family." Relief flickered across her face, but it was guarded. "That's more than I deserve." Before she left, she paused at the doorway. "By the way," she added quietly, "I bought back the bracelet. I didn't pawn it for the money, not really. I was angry that day about something else, and I took it out on you. I can't explain it in a way that makes it right, but I wanted you to know." I studied her for a long moment. "You didn't have to tell me that," I said. "Maybe not," she replied. "But I figured if we're going to try this civility thing, it's a start." When she left, I sat at the table with the untouched scones in front of me. My instinct told me to question her motives, to wonder if this was just a strategic move to secure her place in the family's good graces. But another part of me, smaller but persistent, wondered if perhaps she was trying in her own flawed way to close a wound she'd caused. That night, Mark called. "Lisa told me she dropped off some scones," he said, his tone casual but probing. "She did," I confirmed. "She's been different this week. Quieter. Less defensive." I let out a small breath. Maybe she's realizing some things about herself. Or maybe she's just tired. He chuckled softly. "Either way, I'm glad you two aren't at each other's throats." I didn't tell him about the bracelet confession. That was mine to hold on to for now. Over the next few days, Lisa made small gestures, an invitation to join them for Sunday dinner, a call to ask if I needed anything from the store. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was effort. And effort in our history was no small thing. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that pawn slip in my drawer. It was my quiet reminder that trust once broken didn't knit itself back together just because someone handed you baked goods or spoke in a softer tone. I decided then that this new civility would have boundaries. I would show up for Ethan. I would share a table at holidays. I would respond kindly to kindness. But I would never again give her the power to turn my own family against me without question. It wasn't forgiveness. It was controlled coexistence, and for now, that was enough. The truce was barely 2 weeks old when Mark called with an invitation that made my stomach tighten. "We're having a family barbecue this Saturday," he said cheerfully. "You should come. Lisa's parents will be there too." The mention of Lisa's parents sent a small ripple of unease through me. We had never gotten along, not out of any direct hostility, but because they mirrored Lisa's polished, guarded demeanor. I had no illusions about how they'd spoken of me after the bracelet incident. Still, I said yes. Part of keeping this uneasy peace was showing up, and Ethan would be there. That alone was reason enough. When Saturday came, the air was warm with the scent of grilled meat and the faint sweetness of corn roasting in foil. The backyard was buzzing. Mark at the grill, Ethan darting between clusters of adults, Lisa arranging side dishes on the long patio table. I arrived with a basket of homemade bread which Lisa accepted with a nod that was polite, if not warm. Her parents were seated near the shade, their expressions neutral as they greeted me. The afternoon passed without incident at first. Conversations ebbed and flowed, and I found myself talking with Ethan about his latest school project. Then, in the middle of laughter from a nearby table, I heard a voice cut through, "Where's my purse?" It was Mrs. Daniels, Lisa's mother, standing abruptly scanning the table. "It was right here." Silence fell. People glanced around awkwardly. Lisa stepped forward. "Are you sure you didn't move it? I left it by my chair." Mrs. Daniels insisted, her voice sharp. "It's not here now." I felt the shift in the air before the words came. Her eyes landed on me, not accusing yet, but weighted with something that made my skin prickle. The memory of the bracelet accusation flared, and I could almost hear the unspoken thought. Could it be happening again? Mark moved quickly. "Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll all look around." People began checking under tables behind chairs. My hands stayed still in my lap, partly because I knew if I moved too much, someone might watch me too closely. Then Lisa spoke. "I saw Ethan playing near that chair earlier," she said slowly. "Maybe he picked it up without realizing." Ethan froze wide-eyed. "I didn't touch it," he said quickly. I could feel his panic, the fear of being doubted, the same fear I had once carried in this family. Before I could speak, Lisa's eyes shifted from Ethan to me, as if she was making a decision. "She didn't take it," she said suddenly, her voice firm. Everyone turned to look at her. Mrs. Daniels blinked. "Who?" My mother-in-law Lisa clarified, her tone steady. "If anyone's thinking that, don't. We've already made that mistake once, and it was wrong. We're not doing it again." The words hung in the air. My chest tightened, not from anger this time, but from the strange sensation of someone taking my side in public. A few moments later, Mark found the purse. It had slipped behind the leg of the chair, hidden by the tablecloth. The tension eased, instantly replaced by embarrassed laughter from Mrs. Daniels. "Well, I feel foolish," she muttered. Lisa glanced at me briefly, then busied herself at the table again. When the day wound down and guests began to leave, I lingered by the fence, watching the late sunlight stretch across the grass. Lisa approached quietly. "I meant what I said," she told me, "about not making that mistake again." I noticed I replied, my voice low. "Thank you." She shrugged lightly. "Maybe I'm learning. Or maybe I just didn't want Ethan to go through what you did." It wasn't an apology, but it was something a moment that couldn't have happened even a month ago. Driving home, I realized that trust was still far from rebuilt, but the foundation had shifted. She had chosen in a moment of public doubt to defend me instead of letting the silence do the damage. Maybe it was strategy. Maybe it was sincerity. Either way, it had changed the air between us. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was curled up on the sofa reading when my phone rang. Lisa's name lit up the screen, an unusual occurrence in itself. Her voice was strained, rushed. "Helen, I'm at urgent care with Ethan. Mark's out of town for work. I need a favor." The words made my stomach lurch. "Is Ethan okay?" "They think it's just a sprained ankle," she said quickly, "but they want him off his feet for a few days. The problem is, I have a work trip tomorrow, 3 days non-negotiable. I've tried everything, no one can cover my presentations. I hate to ask, but you want me to stay with him?" I finished for her. "Yes, please." The word please felt like a small surrender coming from her. "Of course," I said without hesitation. "Text me what time you'll be home tonight and I'll pack a bag." When I arrived at their house the next morning, the rain had cleared, but the air still smelled damp. Ethan was on the sofa, his foot propped on pillows, a stack of comic books beside him. He grinned when he saw me. "Grandma, you're here." Lisa was bustling around, dressed in a fitted navy blazer, her hair pulled back. "I left some notes in the kitchen," she said briskly. "Meals, medication schedule, emergency numbers." And she hesitated as though debating something. "I really appreciate this. I know I haven't given you much reason to." She trailed off. "To help you," I finished softly. She nodded, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Lisa," I said, "when it comes to Ethan, you don't have to ask twice." She left a few minutes later, her heels clicking down the walkway. The next 3 days were a quiet rhythm. Breakfast, homework, silly TV shows, board games. Ethan talked more than he usually did when both his parents were home, telling me about his friends, his dreams of becoming an architect, even asking about my childhood. On the second night, just as we were settling in to watch a movie, Lisa called. Her voice sounded tired but lighter. "How's he doing?" "He's fine," I assured her. "Spoiled, maybe. But fine." There was a pause. "I've been thinking about the last couple of years," she said, "and how different things might have been if I'd trusted you from the start." I didn't rush to fill the silence. "I can't change what I did," she went on, "but I can try to do better going forward. Not just for Ethan's sake, but because I don't like the person I was back then." It wasn't a dramatic confession, but it was the first time she'd admitted fault without deflecting or dressing it up as something else. "Doing better is all anyone can do," I said simply. When she returned on Friday evening, she found Ethan and me on the couch, deep into a puzzle. She smiled, a real one this time, and for a moment, she looked less like the polished, guarded woman I'd known and more like someone I could imagine being family without the edge between us. As I packed my things to leave, she stopped me at the door. "Helen, I meant what I said on the phone. I want to try. For real this time." I searched her face, trying to read whether this was another careful performance. But all I saw was a quiet sincerity. "Then we'll try," I said. "Both of us." It struck me as I drove home that the power between us had shifted. She had needed me not in some symbolic way, but in a very real, practical sense. And when she asked, I had come through without hesitation. Maybe that was what had begun to soften her. Not my silence, not my restraint, but the fact that when it mattered most, I still chose to show up. It was a crisp Sunday afternoon when the final test came, though I didn't recognize it as such at first. Mark had invited me over for a casual lunch, just the four of us, he'd said. When I arrived, the smell of roast chicken and herbs drifted from the kitchen. Ethan was on the floor building a Lego fortress and Lisa was setting the table. Everything felt easy. No edge in Lisa's tone, no wary glances, just a quiet, ordinary day. Then, as I took my seat, Ethan looked up and said, "Mom, I found something in the basement yesterday. Can I show Grandma Lisa?" Hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." Ethan disappeared down the hall and returned holding a small velvet-lined box. He placed it in my hands. When I opened it, my breath caught. Inside, gleaming softly in the afternoon light, was the gold bracelet. Her gold bracelet, the one that had sparked the accusations, the whispered doubts, the fracture that had taken so long to mend. For a moment I couldn't move. "I thought you said you lost that years ago," Mark said, looking at Lisa. Lisa's eyes didn't waver. "I did. Or I thought I did. But when we were reorganizing the basement yesterday, Ethan found it inside an old coat pocket. One of mine. I must have put it there and forgotten." Mark frowned. "And you never checked your own things?" Lisa took a deep breath. "No, I didn't. And because of that, I accused someone I shouldn't have. In front of everyone." Her gaze shifted to me, holding steady. "Helen, I am so sorry for what I put you through. I was wrong not just about the bracelet but about you. I should have trusted you from the beginning." The room was still. Ethan's eyes flicked between us as if waiting to see what I would do. My fingers closed gently over the box. "It hurt," I said honestly. "More than you know. Not because of the bracelet, but because my word meant so little in this family." Lisa swallowed hard. "I understand. And I don't expect you to forgive me today. But I wanted you to hear me say it in front of Mark and Ethan, that I was wrong, and you didn't deserve it." Mark reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. "Mom, I should have defended you harder. I'm sorry too." It was strange sitting there with the bracelet between us, hearing the very words I'd once wished for but feeling no triumph. No surge of vindication. Just a quiet release, like a knot finally loosening after years of being pulled tight. I closed the box and slid it back toward Lisa. "It was never about the gold," I said. "Keep it. What matters now is what we do from here." Lisa's eyes shone, though she didn't cry. She nodded, then glanced at Ethan, who was watching us with a small smile. Lunch that day tasted different, lighter somehow. The conversation moved easily, and though the past couldn't be erased, it no longer sat between us like an unspoken shadow. When I left, Lisa walked me to the door. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what I asked. For not using this moment to make me small," she replied. "You could have. And you didn't." I thought about that as I drove home. Years ago, I might have imagined this day as my victory, a public correction of the wrong done to me. But now it felt more like a closing chapter. I didn't need to win. I just needed the truth to be in the open where it belonged. My name is Helen, and for the longest time, the gold bracelet was never just a piece of jewelry to me. It was a symbol not of wealth, but of something far heavier. It carried the weight of mistrust, humiliation, and the painful reminder that in my own family, my word could be questioned so easily. For 2 days in my son's home, I had lived under a cloud. I can still feel the sting of that moment when Lisa's voice, cool and certain, first accused me of taking it. It wasn't the accusation itself that broke me, but the silence that followed, the silence of the people I loved most, who didn't leap to defend me. In those months afterward, I learned to walk with a kind of cautious dignity. I never forgot, but I didn't wage war either. I collected my truth quietly, piece by piece, not for revenge, but for my own clarity. The pawn slip in the attic, the letters that hinted at old patterns of deceit, the awkward moments when Lisa began to falter in her own confidence. All of it was proof that I could have destroyed her reputation if I'd wanted. But I didn't. Not because I'm saintly or forgiving by nature, but because I came to understand something about power. Real power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. It watches. And when the moment comes, it doesn't need to force a reckoning. It lets the truth walk in on its own. That moment came on the Sunday when the bracelet reappeared. I didn't plan for it. I didn't manipulate the situation to bring it into the light. Ethan, with his innocent curiosity, placed it in my hands, and, in that instant, the weight I had carried for so long shifted from my shoulders to Lisa's. When she stood there and admitted she was wrong in front of Mark, in front of Ethan, I saw something in her face I had never seen before. Not the polished composure she used as armor, but something raw, something human. And maybe that's why I didn't savor her discomfort the way I thought I would. Because I realized that what I truly wanted wasn't her humiliation, but the restoration of something I thought was lost forever, the knowledge that my place in this family wasn't as fragile as that accusation had once made it seem. In the weeks that followed, things didn't transform overnight. Trust isn't a switch you flip. It's a bridge rebuilt plank by plank. There were still moments of hesitation between us, still shadows of old habits. But there was also something new, the memory of her standing up for me when her mother's purse went missing, the quiet sincerity in her voice when she asked me to care for Ethan, the look in her eyes when she returned from her trip and thanked me without qualification. Mark, too, began to notice the shift. He spoke more openly about the past, apologizing without prompting. And Ethan, well, children have a way of sensing when the air has cleared. He started inviting me over more often, not as a guest to be entertained, but as someone who simply belonged. Sometimes I still think about the box in the attic, the one with the pawn slip and the letter from Claudia. I could have kept those, used them as leverage if the tides had turned again. Instead, I gave them back to Lisa. Not because I trusted her entirely, but because holding on to them would have meant holding on to the bitterness too. I didn't want to live in that place anymore. Now when I look at the bracelet, yes, I've seen it since resting in her jewelry box. It no longer makes my chest tighten. It's just a bracelet. The real treasure is the quiet understanding that we survived that fracture without becoming enemies for life. It taught me that sometimes the deepest form of revenge isn't destruction, it's becoming untouchable. It's living in such a way that the people who once doubted you have no choice but to respect you. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, especially by someone you loved, you know the kind of scar it leaves. My story isn't about erasing that scar. It's about carrying it with grace until the day comes when the truth no longer needs to be defended because it stands in the open for everyone to see. So, to anyone listening who's been through something similar, remember this: you don't always have to fight to win. Sometimes, all you have to do is stand so firmly in your truth that eventually it speaks for itself. And when it does, the victory is quieter than you imagined, but so much sweeter. If you've ever experienced a moment like this in your own life, I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments. And if you want more stories about resilience, family, and finding your own kind of justice, make sure you subscribe to Grace's Truth. Because sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free, it changes everything.